I will say her and her friends, great dynamic. Not a single one of them argued over which boy was theirs. And
Yeah.
I was like, that I always had that problem. People were like, "You can't have this one." And I'm like, "What? That's it's not real."
Yeah, like, you're never
Why
going to
can't
meet
I
them, so I think
um,
anybody can hypothetically have anybody, so
yes, this is all made up in our brains and
yeah.
on pieces of paper when we play MASH. I don't think
Yeah.
it's a problem.
Hi, I'm Kat.
That's good. That's good.
We did this in front of humans the other day.
Yeah.
Um, Hi, I'm Kat,
And I'm Gabe, and
and
we're
we're
the
the
ghouls
ghouls
next
next door.
door. Talk about
Talk about
spooky
spooky
stuff
stuff.
like puberty. That's what we've been talking
Yeah.
about for like 2 months.
Flashback to middle school me, where I don't know how to do my hair.
Yeah. In 6th grade, every day I wore my hair in a bun
Mm,
because I was like, I don't know what to do with this because it was just so
yeah.
curly. And uh, because because I'm mixed as well, like I have very thick curls, and it takes a lot of time and attention that
Yeah.
people in my family just didn't know to do. And so I ended up just not taking care of my hair for a very long time. And it took until middle school when I had a family friend that lived with us who was
Mm,
also Latina, and she would take care of my hair. And it was like, oh
mm.
my God, look at, I just have so
Yeah,
much
yeah.
hair.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I just had bangs, which is sometimes a bad decision, depending on who you ask.
Yeah. I had bangs too sometimes,
Yeah.
which
I
is
did
not always good for curly hair.
I didn't know how to wear makeup, so I did this really fun thing where I put concealer because I was convinced at like 13 that I had bags under my eyes, which I probably did. I don't know. And I just put concealer under my eyes, but put no other makeup on the rest of my face.
Hmm.
And I thought that looked great.
Yeah, I did a lot of like
10 out of 10.
orange looking makeup and like
Mm,
bright purple eyeshadow. And I was like, I got it. But that wasn't until like it was
yeah.
entirely too late for someone to be doing something so stupid. Um, in middle school, I had like no friends, so
Same.
people thought I was weird,
Yeah.
and now here I am, still
Yeah.
weird, but people do like me now. So,
Yeah.
um,
Same. At least
but
you, at least you like me and like
yes,
probably
I
3 other
do
people.
at least.
Yeah.
Probs more. We are finishing out our monstrous femme series finally.
Woo.
It's been a long series, and then we're going to start some new things after the road to 200. And we are finishing it with an interesting film that we didn't originally plan to do, but
Mhm.
it dropped and people were crazy about it. And then I was like, well, I got to see it because in the many Encanto Facebook groups I'm in, they were like, wow, this is a great film and it makes
Yeah.
us feel similarly to Encanto. And I was like, what? And then it was
Yeah, must watch.
further confirmed because I was talking about Monstrous Femmes with a friend, and their child was like really loved Turning Red.
Yeah.
And they essentially told me like, this is about a girl and she becomes a monster and she learns to love it and it's very matriarchal. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, it's made for our show. So we added it to the list.
Yeah, this movie manages to be for kids and adults at the same time, which I feel like many films don't manage to do without being like stupid. Like,
Hmm.
like where they'll just like put like adult jokes in it and they'll be like, it's for adults too. We're like, no, this is like, you can relate to this because trauma. And then you're like, whoa, yeah, I can relate to this because trauma.
Yeah.
But also, like, it was one of the first films I've really seen that shows puberty for people who are experiencing that specific type of puberty in a
Hmm.
way that like isn't like damning it or like making it like horrific in a way that's like upsetting, I guess. Like it was
Yeah.
like horrific in a way that's powerful.
Hmm.
Um
Like, it's a
Yeah.
necessary thing, like, it's gonna happen, and so you
Mhm.
are, coming to terms with it versus, like, "Oh, this is horrific, awful thing happens to your body,"
Yeah.
which is a nice ending note for a series that has otherwise been almost exactly that, where it's just
Yeah.
like, "Isn't it horrific to become a woman or, like, a femme?" And it was like, "Yeah." This is like it can be horrific at times, but it's also really fun. It all depends on, like, who you're spending your time with and how you're looking at yourself and your life.
Mhm.
And, like, May has the best friends. They're
Yeah.
amazing. I love them, and I love how unique each one of the kids are and that they're best friends, and there's no real villain, which is also I love this, like, how we're getting to this place in media. Like, it's, like, in children's films where there's not a villain, like, we're not
Yeah.
villainizing a specific type of person. It's just like situations are the villain and we
Yeah.
overcome obstacles together, and that's how it is. Instead of there's like an evil stepmother or like a witch or something that just like represents a
Yeah.
woman who's unmarried and old. Like we're over that
Yeah, no,
now.
that's super real. Like, children's media has really taken a turn in a very positive way to like recognize that good and evil is not one like this black and white thing. It's like there are complex characters that exist and complex situations that exist that like extend past that. And it's like, yeah, really positive to see.
Yeah, it's super good. So we're going to be talking about Turning Red, and it's a very recent film. I highly recommend you go and watch it if you haven't. It's on Disney Plus. I'm sure you have a friend who has like a free subscription, like you
Yeah.
could get, or you could get one.
Yeah.
It's definitely worth it. And while you're there, also watching Condo.
I think Disney does like a free trial and you can just kind of
Mhm.
like watch all of them in the first week.
Yeah, and there's also, like, their shorts are really great, like, I watched
Mhm.
the short before I watched Turning Red, Bow, I forget what
Yeah,
it's
Bow's really
about,
good. We have to
and
watch
it's
Luca
so
next.
good, yeah, um, like, I need to pace out my children's movies that make me cry because
Yeah, it was very
I can
sweet.
only take so many, um, but yeah, do you wanna jump into it, Kat?
Who's go first?
Me,
You go first. Yay.
throw me up there.
Gabe.
Yes. So, like I said, we were talking about Turning Red, and this film is from 2022, brand new, and it is about a 13-year-old girl named Mei Lin turns into a giant red panda whenever she gets too excited, and it's directed by Dong Hee Shi. Um, which is just right to the point. That's exactly what happens. She becomes a red panda.
Yeah.
But it's also so much more than that. So I'm very excited to talk about this. And if you have watched it, I really um, would love to hear from you and what your experiences are. I've talked to young people who are like a little younger than this age that's occurring here, and I'm very curious to hear like if this movie will affect how they experience puberty later, like if
Yeah.
it will be a beneficial thing for
Yeah,
them.
and if they feel seen too.
Mhm. 'Cause I definitely did. I was like, and that's not like I mean, I'm not the target demographic, but I also feel very seen in it. So Turning Red follows May, who is an ordinary preteen girl with amazing friends and a beautiful relationship with her mom. She is incredibly close to her mother, and she spends her time outside of school working at the family business. She is super obsessed with a boy band, and she's just discovering that real boys can be pretty cute and make really great mermen, which is
Yeah.
very fun. And this film brings us along May's journey of self discovery and growth. And as May begins her puberty process, she also discovers an old hidden family secret. She and the other women in her family are wear red pandas.
Yeah.
They turn into red pandas when they feel too many emotions. So in the IMDb synopsis, it said when she was too excited, but it also like when she was angry. It was just any emotion that was not regulated,
Yeah.
um, quote unquote, to like what is acceptable. Um, she would turn to a giant red panda. And at first, May is stressed by this change because there's like hair in unexpected places, no control of our emotions. Our body is so foreign to us now, and our
Yeah.
parents just couldn't possibly understand. Like, here we are again in puberty world. Um, and you also may wonder, like, since this is like a matriarchal thing, like it's all the female line of the family, like why May's mom didn't tell her about the red panda beforehand, and we
Yeah.
we asked that like every time. Like with last week, what blew my mind, we were like, if you know about mermaids, why wouldn't you tell her? We had something like that. Oh well, yeah. It's just like if you know ahead of time, and she clearly knows ahead of time because her
Yeah.
mom was a
It's
is
like, why
also was
wouldn't
a red
you
panda.
prepare them?
Yeah. But, they do mention, like, May's mother mentions, that she thought they'd have more time,
Yeah.
and that felt really real to me because I understood, like, how there's, like, a difference in how soon people are growing up, like, because of,
Yeah.
like, society, and so, like, considering, like, people my age, we tended to mature and go through puberty faster than our parents, or at least, like, that was my experience and some other people I've talked to, their experience, where, like, I got my period when I was, like, 12 or 13, which is,
Yeah.
like, what's happening in this film, whereas, like, my mother got hers, like, later than that. So like she has this kind of perception of like kids kind of grow a bit too fast these days, but also it's like sometimes you want to preserve their youth, right? Like this is
Yeah.
such a jarring
You
thing.
have like a view of them as if they're still like a little kid. So like you feel like you have more time and then suddenly they're a teenager.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what's happening, like, on the outside end of things, right, is, like, she is very clearly the mom, kind of wrestling with the fact that May is going to grow up, like, now she's noticing boys, she read all those things, and now she's like, "Oh, no." So, this is a typical coming of age monstrous femme story, but it's also so much more than that, which is what we found in a lot of these films, because May learns to appreciate her red panda, with the help of her friends, she turns the panda into a positive experience. Other kids love it and like get a kick out of how cute it is, and just like also like May is very adorable and sweet and just like a really fun human, and people
Yeah.
really that about her. And so she soon begins make and bake using the Red Panda and selling Red Panda merch
Yeah.
with the intent of using that money to go to a beloved concert of her favorite boys, Four Town, which is just
Yeah.
a boy band. And it's super cute. There's 5 of them. I don't know why they're called Four Town. The song is super cute. It's like, "You don't turn no one turns my tummy quite like you." It's so
Yeah.
childish. I will say, her and her friends, great dynamic. Not a single one of them argued over which boy was theirs. And
Yeah.
I was like, that I always had that problem. People were like, "You can't have this one." And I'm like, "What? That's it's not real."
Yeah, like you're never
Why
going
can't
to meet
I
them. So
not?
I think anybody can hypothetically have anybody. So
Yes, this is all made up in our brains and
yeah.
on pieces of paper when we play MASH. I don't think
Yeah.
it's a problem.
Also, if it was real, it'd be a problem because
Yeah,
there's an age
because they're
difference.
adults, and I'm 12. So,
Yeah.
but I did think it was funny that they were
Yeah.
like, "That's your you stand that one." Um, That's how I feel about BTS. I
Yeah. I
change a
mean, they
boy
had the
every week.
best friends. Like, I wish I had those friends. I have those friends now, but like, I wish, or I have that friend now. You are that. You are all four
For
friends
I
in
d I,
one.
change my personality however it feels. I will say, like, her friends, I appreciate how different they all are.
Yeah.
Abby is, like, my life energy, and if you're watching, that's who I'm dressed as because she's just, like, this little terror gremlin, and I was like, I feel so strongly about her every single time. She's just like, "Yeah." Get him. She's like, my mom said I can't listen to that music because it's stripper music. And I said, what's wrong with that? And I was like, I love this little kid so much.
Yeah.
And then there's Priya, is that her name? There's like the one who's really, really quiet, and she's like,
Yeah.
she doesn't emote in ways that like we usually see, but she's never ridiculed for that.
Yeah.
Like
She's the chill one.
she just gets to be that,
Yeah.
and then you got, like, the cool yeah, they all have their own little things, they're super cute, and so important to have, like, these different girls that people can relate to, um, especially when you're growing up, especially about in a film where you're gonna see, like, your experiences
Well, yeah,
kind
because
of
there's
work.
like not one way to be a girl. So it's like cool
Mhm.
to have many different perceptions of what that could look like.
Yeah, exactly. Um However, there's a problem in the film because the night of the concert, the beloved concert before town, happens to fall on the same night of her ceremony. I forget what they called it in the film, but essentially, to control her panda, her red panda, she needed to undergo the ceremony where she would separate from her red panda and contain it in a piece of jewelry. So all
Yeah,
the women in our family have done this, and it has to be on this like red moon, and it's this you only get one opportunity, one shot, one opportunity. You're gonna
gonna
you're gonna
capture
lose
it.
it. um and so she's conflicted, right?
Yeah,
Part of that is because she's not entirely sure she wants to give up her red panda. Like she's grown really attached to it, um and she doesn't really see it as the monster that her family sees their pandas as,
yeah,
because she has with her friends in that relationship learned to really like coexist with it in a way that no one else had, um, which makes her situation unique. But also, it's like you gotta go see the boys. It's like once in a lifetime opportunity, you know.
yeah.
Um, I probably did not go to a concert until I was like in high school, though. So, but that's me because I wasn't allowed to go anywhere. Um, had a very strict family. So it gets to this question where it's like, will May sacrifice her new red panda powers to become normal? Or will she learn to love her red panda and find the beauty in what makes us monstrous? And that's what I really appreciate about this film. In some of the other films that we've covered in this series, is like kind of taking back our monster instead of
Yeah.
being made victim because of our monster, and hating ourselves. So, um, really, really highly recommend. I will say though that as much love as this film has gotten, like I said, fans of Encanto are really excited for this future of wholesome, loving movies about family growth and representation. But there's also been a bit of backlash from viewers that I want to address because I think it's like interesting to hear some of the points. There was like one that like the girls are growing up a little too fast from their point of view, like, oh, they like boys and blah blah blah, and she sneaks out and yada yada. I was like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, at that
she did,
age, I liked a different person every week,
yeah.
to the point where, like, we had to make code names for them. So I feel like it was pretty accurate. I was
You have
like,
code
"I
names for the
love
boys
this
that you like.
person this week, and then now I love this person this week," and my friends and I had a code. So when because we had to write our journals in 8th grade English,
Hmm.
and our teacher, I didn't want them to know because they would be in the class. So I was like, "I'm gonna give them a code name," and that way we could talk about them in front of other people, and no one would know. Like, we thought we were so cool. Um, but yeah, it was like a different person each week. I was like,
Yeah.
I
I
love
moved a lot when
everybody.
I was younger, and I will say every time I moved, when I had to, like, get a new class, I was always like, "I'm gonna have" like, I would go in with the intention of having 1 crush, at
Yeah.
least. I was like, "I'm gonna have a crush. Who's it? Who's gonna be it? Which lucky boy or person in this class is gonna be my crush this week?" And
Yeah,
then,
mine was like
here I am.
someone was nice to me for 2 seconds and
Yeah,
I was
I
like,
was like
in love.
I was like, "It's gonna be you today." I am we're both pansexual, so it was always like personality driven. Like someone was like really funny and I
Yeah.
was like, "Wow, he seems really cute now when he wasn't before."
Yeah.
It happened all the time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so one of the complaints I've seen was I don't see myself in this film. So there was a review by a white man explaining that he doesn't see himself in a movie like Turning Red, and he expressed distaste for the film for lacking in his experiences. And there's a lot to unpack in that idea, but I want to start by saying that I think it's okay for one of the millions of things out there to not be about a white man or the white person's experience at all. Just
Yeah.
one out of the everything else. Sorry. We have to get one at least. Been there, seen that. It makes me think of like Jordan Peele when he said he doesn't see himself ever casting a white male lead in his films because he's already seen that movie.
Yeah.
And I agree. We've already seen that. We all have. It doesn't have to be about you, dude. And it's like let other people have a chance to tell their stories. We need to rotate the crops or else our land will rot.
Yeah.
That's all. But further than that, the other part of this is that this is a person that is simply out of practice. He has not had to work to identify with a piece of media before because it was already made for him always. And so,
Yeah.
as an incredibly mixed femme person, I have had an entire lifetime of practice finding a connection with characters that do not look like me. You learn to find other parts of their experience to bond over. Like, I'm not Asian. Although I am Canadian. And so I can't entirely relate to May's experience, but I can relate in ways that I've always done in media. Like I had similar experiences growing up, and there are many other pieces of the story that I really relate to that I'll expand on later.
Yeah.
Like for some of us, we've had to just grasp anything that we can relate to because there's nothing out there that can really symbolize our experiences specifically. Like that's never going to happen unless I write it because for one I'm very unique. But like
Yeah.
besides that, like uh we just don't have those stories. It's just not out there. So like, growing up, there were no and continue to not be any Disney princesses for me. I either had to be indigenous or Indian. Like,
Yeah.
that was my option, because they were brown enough that I was like, "Oh, I could do that." But even my Latina heroes weren't quite for me. Like, Selena Quintanilla is a Mexican American, and I'm Puerto Rican American. So, I couldn't I'm not Mexican, so I don't have that direct connection to her, but I could identify with her dual identity as a Latina American who doesn't fit into either identity entirely. Like,
Yeah.
you don't feel at home in Mexico, she doesn't feel home here. And it's like, I feel that. The fact that she
Yeah.
couldn't speak Spanish fluently, I was like, oh my God, we're the same person. So my response to this man's outcry of lack of representation is simply figure it out.
Yeah.
Find what parts of you are in this piece and understand that there is no one singular story to tell. There's a
Yeah.
multitude of them, and sometimes we just have to find the pieces that matter to us. And so I tell them to like put on his media analysis glasses,
Yeah.
give it another shot, and maybe you'll find things that you actually relate to. Or not even just maybe you like uh relate to any of the other characters in there, like her father or her mother or the other girls or the little boy. Like there's so
Yeah.
many people in that show that you could definitely. Anyway, the other negative review that I want to address is about May's mother, Ming, and her grandmother specifically, because there's been a lot of hate towards her for being too overbearing and controlling of her daughter, and then her mother of her. And
Yeah.
there's also similar vitriol towards Alma of Encanto. And
Yeah.
firstly, how many mothers are even alive in Disney to be criticized? Like,
Yeah.
let's give them some props for not having anime mom disease and dying off camera, first of
Yeah.
all. But also, these are women who are existing under some very extreme and traumatic societal pressures that those other Disney moms wouldn't understand, even if they
Yeah.
were alive. There were parts where Turning Red reminded me of Brave quite a bit. I mean, turn my mom to a bear like that. Like
Yeah.
they're both bears anyway. But the exploration of that mother daughter bond, the pressures of young girls, their experience to perform and uphold certain like traditional values that their mothers are like putting on their shoulders is present in both of these films.
Yeah.
But it's like further exasperated because Ming and her mother have the added pressure of being like immigrants, of like Brave Merida's mom is the queen.
Yeah.
Like there's no one who fits more into this environment than the queen. Ming and her mother are not that. So there's this added stress of having to fit into a society that doesn't want them to. And so there's a lot of stress on them to conform and to
Yeah.
perform this perfect person. And so that adds to that. And they're essentially outcasts in their own homes. And then Alma literally fled persecution and watched her husband murdered in front of her. Sorry for spoilers, but I think we could cut her some slack.
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding me? She raised triplets on her own. Like, what are
Yeah.
we doing? How dare you? Every other Disney's mom is dead. So all I want to say about that is just lay off. Leave these women alone. They are
Yeah.
not the villain in the story. They are not Mother Gothel of Tangled. They are moms, human, flawed, and absolutely in love with their families. And I think that was beautiful. And so, like, knock it off.
Yeah.
And then just to kind of tie it up with my review overall of the film is that there's a lot to be said about this truly fun and amazing film, and I loved it on so many levels. I identified really strongly with May, like I said, specifically through her connection with her family, the very strong matriarchal line of women. Definitely have that in my family. Her obsessions with boy bands, boys, and attention, and that like strong desire to do the best and needing to be told that you did the best and
Yeah.
um being the one who's doing good. Like being the golden child, 100%, that pressure was my entire existence. Like I had to be the one that did it. I had to be
Yeah.
the one who gets the good grades and performs the best. And that has contributed to a lot of my anxiety now
Yeah.
and why I overperform in most things. Um, so I super strongly relate to a lot of things that are happening in here because this is a film about learning to love yourself, but it's also about the emotional connection between a mother and daughter. And then it's also about the dual identity of this Asian Canadian girl who's being in like being mixed myself. I understood the stress of straddling those two realities, of performing the role of daughter at home and someone else entirely in the world. And
Yeah.
director Dong Hee Shi said about the Red Panda specifically, after visiting a sanctuary. They said they're native to China. You got it? Okay. They're native to China. And then also, it's like red and white. It's like Chinese, but also the colors of the Canadian flag, too. So it felt like the perfect animal to tell this story about the Chinese Canadian teenage girl. And so much of this like film is Dom Hee's own experiences. Like she doesn't turn into a red panda, as far as I know. But whole tension between her and her mom, the changing, like the fact that like red pandas are seen as like a good symbol, like all of those things are really built from her experiences. And even though it's like takes place in Toronto and it takes place at a time period for her, all of those things felt so relatable to me. I was like, oh my God, this is about me. Um, and there are many pressures on children of families that feel the intense weight of societal expectations on them. And there's an experience here that is very unique to Asian Canadians and Asian Americans or other mixed race families that add to the story. May is seen as this golden child, and she holds on her shoulders the weight of the future and the respect of the whole city that she lives in. She must be the best version of herself and please her mother. And when she stops doing that, she becomes this red panda. And though this film is very much a puberty film, it's also about allowing ourselves to let go and to feel. Like in Inside Out, our protagonist learns that it's okay to show all her emotions, that they are a piece of her, and do not make her any less worthy of love or praise. I really like the film, if you can't tell. And I continue to like read things about it and hear about people. Um, and it just always surprises me when people have certain negative reviews where I'm like, that's nothing. You're saying nothing. You're just like outing yourself as not understanding other people's experiences. Like, I get it.
Yeah, they're like, "I'm trying to stay relevant desperately." Also just like really bold of like a white man to be like, "I'm going to talk about this girl's puberty experience cuz it doesn't relate to me." It was just like, "What?"
Well, it's just like the people who like think reverse racism exists, right? It's
Yeah.
like the same people who got mad at Jordan Peele for saying he doesn't want to cast a white man are like, that's racist. It's like that's you don't know what that word means,
Yeah.
first of all. And you're not listening.
Yeah.
He's not saying no, like no one should ever make films with
Yeah, it's
white
just he's not
protagonists.
gonna.
Like he's not gonna do that. It doesn't make any sense for him to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah. People really be out here. Like go back inside. Go back inside.
It's okay. Just let the new
Not
stuff
everyone's Red
happen.
Panda should come out. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You should
Okay.
accept your monster.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's like a pretty I love that it was shaped around this like millennial experience in a lot of ways too, because are a lot of the first time generation to like break through generational curses or generational
Mhm.
like trauma and like make changing situations, both in like accepting mental health, self acceptance, et cetera, et cetera.
So real.
So it was very real to have our main character, like it be framed in the 90s, I believe, right?
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, because it's just like one, it's like cool. Now all the 90s kids who are watching this along with the children will like feel seen,
Because it's
but
like early
also,
2000s,
yeah, I
if
mean,
you're
like
in middle school.
either way, I feel like, yeah, the younger generations and were
Mhm.
still in there
Yeah,
deep.
definitely. It was in
Um,
our bracket of, like,
yeah,
we were all those kids who had a lot of pressure to perform and be
yeah.
the best, and,
Grades
like,
equaled love. What do you
yeah,
mean?
everyone gets a trophy kinda thing too, so it's like so now we're always expecting trophies, it's a whole thing.
If I'm not perfect all the time, I don't deserve
I
love
have
and should
failed,
be dead
yeah.
now.
If I am not working
I
myself
have
into the ground, I'm not
proven
working at
to
all.
yeah, I've proven to everybody that I shouldn't have been born in the first place.
I'm just confirming
Um,
everything I've always thought.
these are not things I should talk about in therapy. What? But
Yes.
but as Gabe said, this is our last Monsters Femme series, and as it is an unexpected addition in a lot of ways, it was really wonderful. The horrors of this film were much more about the horrors of puberty and familial trauma than it was about a monster itself. In fact, actually, for my section, I was like, I wonder if there's lore about red pandas. There's not really.
Mhm.
And in fact, red pandas aren't monstrous at all in Chinese mythology, nor do they have much of a mythological backstory in the
Yeah,
first
'cause they were
place.
just real animals.
Yeah, and that was done on purpose, actually. So, according to an article on Marie Claire, Symbolism in Turning Red Explained by Quincy Lagarde. The writer director Dalmichi told Insider that Pixar chose the red panda in part because red pandas don't have a deep mythological background. I think we wanted the space and the room to come up with a whole legend and mythology, she told the outlet. The red panda being a relatively clean slate means that the themes of the film can stand on their own without other popular myths being added or conflated with the
Mm.
story, which I thought was really interesting.
They get to control it.
Yeah, it's not like they have to like pull from something else. It's this unique thing that they get to totally make their own. And they also said that they wanted the red panda to clearly represent like this magical puberty experience as well as like a transformation, and that the red panda presented an opportunity with color as well to represent the period itself, as well as like the more intense emotions of like anger, lust, embarrassment. And the relation to the actual red pandas stemmed mostly from the fact that one, they were like really cute, but also like a character trait of red pandas is that they're very dedicated and protective over their young. So that kind
Huh,
of correlates
I
too.
didn't know that.
Yeah. I didn't either until I read it in the Marie Claire article. And I mean, who knows? Maybe that's not real. I've never seen a red panda in real life, but according to the internet, that's what it said. So,
Got it.
um, but yeah, so a lot of ways, my section instead will be oriented around like what I think the director was hoping people would take away from it, and less about like the monster itself, but more about like what the story was trying to tell us,
Mhm.
and about like that familial trauma can be generational and that protection can become toxic if done without clear communication and trust, and as well as like dealing with intense emotional stress is alleviated when you have strong, loving relationships surrounding you.
Mhm.
So I won't talk about the horrors of puberty in this episode because we did that last week, and in a lot of ways in previous iterations of the Monsters from series. So if you're interested, go ahead and check this out.
Mhm.
Um, but today I'm going to be talking about trauma.
Woo!
Yay! It's actually one of my special interests. So like this information mostly just lives in my brain, and I also just pulled stuff from the internet so that you know I'm not full of crap. Um, so, for those of you who know very little about trauma and its impact on the brain, I'll provide some introductory knowledge. Trauma is unique to the individual, and an event that may be traumatic to one person could just be like another day for someone else. It all kind of
Mhm.
relates to our sensitivities to various situations, and ultimately connects to all other facets of our life. For example, a parent may interpret a house fire as being horribly traumatic to themselves and then like put that on their child to think like they are experiencing the traumatic event in the same exact way, where the child could potentially be more traumatized by the loss of their dog that ran away from the fire instead of the fire itself.
Hmm.
So like everyone's kind of impacted by different events uniquely to who they are as a person. Um, most trauma, honestly, is purely subjective as an experience, in that it's highly dependent upon the impact on the individual. In the same way, trauma can manifest in behaviors vastly differently depending on the person, because every person has a different method of coping, as
Mm-hmm.
well as different protective factors. That I'll kind of explain that a little bit more later, but like different things impact you different depending on like what security systems you have built up in your own body,
Mm-hmm.
as well as externally.
Yeah, like how
So
prepared you are.
and also like who's in your life. So like a child who has a caring and attentive person or like a support system in their life may handle a traumatic event better than a child who feels unseen and isolated. And better is also subjective to the outsider viewing that child's experience as well as the person's experience. Like someone who is handling their trauma by repressing themselves and forcing themselves into a dissociated, more convenient state of people pleasing and like becoming a shell of their true identity, but sits still in class, may be
Mm-hmm.
perceived by others as handling it better. Or more conveniently than the child who like handles their emotions more outwardly uh, through aggressive or destructive behavior. But better is really more that the child or person feels safe enough to explore their emotions without threat or fear of abandonment. So, as we
Mm.
saw in the film, it was like sad that when she had to lie to her mom to say like when I get upset, I think about the people who love me, and she was thinking of her friends. She had strong friendships that were like really powerful and meaningful to her, that like acted as a support system, and she didn't have this fear that she would be abandoned for being herself and who she actually was.
Mhm.
And that's like very important when you're dealing with traumatic events. If you feel safe, your ability to get through those events, even if you're not handling it, like you still may have really strong emotional reactions, etc. You have a stronger support system to support you through that event. You're going to come out the other side stronger a lot of the time.
Mhm.
Versus if like you don't really have any support systems, you're more likely to exhibit more destructive coping mechanisms, both to yourself and those around you, but mostly to yourself.
Yeah.
Um, So men said with understanding from their peers and caretakers in their life, they have more protective factors is kind of what they're called. These are things that kind of prevent the trauma from impacting the brain in a damaging way.
Mhm.
The same thought process extends to adults, and in many ways, we may feel that's familiar to some of us when thinking internally, looking at ourselves of like how we react to situations, but also like looking at a lot of parents,
Mhm.
specifically from the Gen X and above generations, who spent a lot of their time like not processing their emotions because they had to push them down. There were the I won't think the societal pressures were necessarily different, but the conformity push maybe was.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's really about like, do you feel safe to be yourself, who you are authentically with the people who you love and who are supposed to love you? And that kind of impacts how trauma affects your brain and whether or not like it is as damaging versus not as damaging. But as I said, like the impact of said experience often also differs for each person. And in many ways, existence itself is traumatic, and especially when living in a capitalistic, oppressive society. The results being that most adults are balls of unhealed trauma, covered in knots of repressed traumatic events and experiences that they've either never coped with or are still actively working through. This is showcased beautifully in our film with May's mom and grandmother unintentionally just through like keeping their own feelings in, creating this like cycle of traumatic experiences that May is tasked with untangling.
Mhm.
And whether this is done intentionally or unintentionally, the impact is something that young people today are dealing with, and is being reflected a lot in children's media. We're seeing this explored, like these family dynamics, and finding new ways to cope with things, and also just like children helping their parents see the world in a different way.
Mhm.
That's being reflected in a lot of children's media, specifically like Disney Pixar, but like I'm sure there are others, and that we saw in films like Encanto, Turning Red, Luca, and others. Um, The research on trauma is ever evolving. So a lot of this stuff I'm saying, but it's very possible that the research on it could change because it's something that is more recently being explored in depth on its impact on like health outcomes,
Mhm.
as well as like the true impact of like what it does to our brains. So the research is ever evolving. And when I originally was introduced to trauma research, the bulk of this exploration was done through understanding the early childhood development and the impact of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. So, for anyone who heard that, is like, what is that? The CDC describes ACEs as potentially traumatic events that occur in a child in childhood. ACEs can include violence, mental abuse, growing up in a family with mental health or substance abuse problems. Toxic stress from ACEs can change the brain's development and affect how the body responds to stress. So, ACEs are linked to chronic health problems, mental illness, and substance misuse in adults. However, ACEs can be prevented and like healed from. So, something that is interesting about this is you can actually score yourself using the ACE framework, to figure out like what health outcomes may happen if you've experienced a certain amount of adverse childhood experiences.
Hmm.
But I strongly advise against doing that unless you're in a very positive, healthy mindset at the time. As the score itself can be very triggering when taken in without any tangible next steps to the or solutions to
Mhm.
the information
Just
that you're
knowing
getting.
and being like,
Yeah,
"Wow,
because
this
it's
sucks."
like you could get all these really horrible health problems, and you're just like, not only was I traumatized greatly, but now I'm also gonna die. Like, like it just activates something in you that's very stressful. So I
Yeah.
don't recommend looking at it until you like recognize all the ways in which you are actively healing from that stuff. Because one thing that's really important to know is that when you're looking at this stuff, that there's the brain is like plastic, and I'll explain that a little bit more. So what's important to know when you're exploring your own trauma is that neuroplasticity of your brain makes it possible to heal from your trauma. And while that is something that takes active work, it is possible. And also, if you're interested in just learning more about this, I highly recommend checking out one of the more popular spoken explanations of this that Nadine Burke Harris speaks on in their TED Talk. It's a video generally shown in like intro trauma classes. Um, and was something that I was shown in my intro trauma class. But it really just they do a great job instilling this like state of urgency within the listener, as well as just like explaining things in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, like TED
Um,
Talks too.
yeah, exactly. So neuroplasticity is a fancy word to explain that the brain creates neural pathways, both from traumatic events as well as through positive and constructive therapeutic healing experiences. So, with that understanding, the ACEs can feel slightly less like a death sentence because you have next steps. You have like instead of it being like, "Oh god, this is awful," instead it can be like, "Okay, now I recognize that this is actually really important and that I
Mhm.
probably should actively work to fix these things so that I don't have all these like stress related health problems." And yeah, it just gives you more of a reason to fight for yourself in your healing journey. It makes you feel way more validated being like, "Hey, maybe I don't talk to that person anymore because they hurt me
Yeah.
mentally." And then you feel like you have
Does
an
more harm than
authority
good,
to
yeah.
justify that because of the things that adverse childhood experiences can cause medically within yourself. You have more of like a foothold to stand on. So for anyone who's like still in their survival stage of existence, you likely won't start to recognize the impact of your experiences or like how they may have traumatized you until you reach a more stable or safe space. The fun thing about the brain is when it's in survival mode, you are literally just going day to day. So you can't even view things from the outside. Like you can't
Mhm.
even look at the forest. You are in the trees.
Yeah.
You are plowing through the trees. The forest doesn't exist. You're just trying to get out of the forest.
Yeah.
Where when you're out of it, you start to see the trees more. You start to like reflect and like have more of an understanding of what's happened to you. And that's ironically, unfortunately, one of the times where the more upsetting symptoms of trauma rear their head.
Mm.
That's when things are like calmer and when you've left the active danger that you were on under. So once out of danger, your body may have trouble adjusting and regulating your emotional responses to stress. This can manifest in self sabotage, not trusting your instincts or intentions of others, as well as your own intentions, having big emotional reactions to things that used to feel like not a big deal, or seeking out experiences that feel familiar but are dangerous. So, like, for example, to speak to my own experience, I used to do that all the time. Uh,
Mm.
I used to think that like I was the cause of every bad thing that ever happened. And that's like how I had a very long self acceptance journey, I
Mhm.
guess. So when I was younger, I handled this by like dissociating and like desperate people pleasing and like shrinking myself. But as I got older, like I started to handle it in really toxic ways where I guess like arguably the first way was toxic, but it was like either through like really reckless decision making or like irrational emotional reactions to situations that didn't call for them. Like the one time where like someone died and I was like, everything's fine. And then I got a flat tire and I was like, sell my car.
Yeah.
We don't need the car anymore. The tire's ruined. So the whole car needs to go because I don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, things that like seem small before like escalate because you're out of the danger, but your body still feels like you're in danger still.
Mhm. It's
Um,
like when you have a bad day and you take the piece of paper, like the paper towel, and it rips
mhm.
wrong, and you're just like, "Oh, now I'm broken."
Yeah,
But
like the
everything
world
else
is
you
ending.
understood, yeah.
This is a slippery slope into my mental decline.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, so like I would not handle things. There was lots of like through my healing journey, like things I realized that I did that weren't good
Mhm.
before I started that. So like I would also seek out like partners or friendships that subconsciously reminded me of those traumas and that they either exhibited erratic, toxic behaviors, struggled with alcoholism or drug addiction, or were like otherwise just neglectful and cruel to me because I wasn't able to save the people that I loved from their inner demons. So I often sought out partners or friendships that had similar problems with the hopes that like I could finally be enough for someone to be get better for.
Mm.
And that's not how it works. That's not real. And not healthy ultimately. It's definitely damaging and re-traumatizing experience for like everyone involved, including me and that person. So another big part of the healing journey also involves like viewing your reactions to your own traumatic experiences, and viewing your actions and how they may have traumatized others, either through intentional or unintentional harm. So an unfortunate reality of being a traumatized person is that, as we saw in the film, like you're likely to hurt people in your healing journey or
Mhm.
before you realize you need to start a healing journey. Like there are things that you did when you were hurt that hurt other people. Um, so like while the intention behind your actions may have been like, I didn't mean to, but like it didn't really matter at the end of the day because you hurt somebody and your behavior hurt someone else. So what's important when unpacking all of this for yourself is recognizing all you can really do is take accountability for those actions, and do better in the future. Apologizing is a piece of it, but apologizing with the goal of external forgiveness, like from the other person, can be re-traumatizing for the person you've hurt in the first place, which will like make the situation worse. So an apology should only be given with the understanding that that person you're apologizing to may not forgive you for what you've done, and ultimately, like they have that's their right, and you kind of just got to be like, okay, I did a bad thing. You
Hmm.
right.
Fair,
I have
fair.
to respect that. So yeah, like external forgiveness is not something you can control. So you can only forgive yourself and like accept the consequences of that person not wanting to be in your life anymore. So you're not entitled to another person's peace as much as they're not entitled to yours. And like yeah, all you can do is hope that like that changes, but understand and accept that if that never does, that just has to be fine. It's also important not to project your trauma onto others. Something that like happens a lot when you're like unpacking your own trauma and you like feel like you got to a really great place of regulating yourself. Um, you see other people's experiences and you're like, that was like my experience. Maybe my advice and helping them recognize that that's what happened is helpful. It's not. Like approaching someone else with the intention to have them recognize their trauma can be more traumatizing than just letting them cope with their experiences authentically.
Mhm.
If someone is okay with how an experience took place, calling attention to how they should be reacting instead of how they are reacting is you projecting your trauma onto somebody else. Like forcing someone else to recognize the trauma is ultimately a selfish and centering thing to do, because you're making your experience about validating your own experience instead of what is actually in their best interest. You're like, your experience is your experience, but now it's mine.
Mhm.
So we're both going to talk about the fact that happened to me too, and now you're going to be upset too. When like if they were fine, just let them be fine, kind of
Yeah.
deal. Um, and as someone who like feels like an alien all the time and doesn't understand people sometimes, I repeat this information to myself all the time. So like I say this to you because this is my internal dialogue. I'm like, I did a bad thing. I need to just process this. I can only accept that like I've done a thing and they apologizing won't really help because ultimately that's a selfish thing to do unless they want me to say sorry, which is
Mhm.
like you do it once, then you move on. I don't know. But I say this all to you because this is my internal dialogue for myself. And it also is backed by like scientific trauma research. So like you get a little bit of both. Um, and ultimately, like either way, it like kind of ties back to just like navigating the world and figuring out what the world is and how to exist in it because it's like kind of a bad time for most humans. So you kind of just gotta like do the best you can to exist in the least bad way possible. Bad being subjective as well. Um, And yeah, as I said previously, it's important to have just like tangible next steps when exploring your own trauma. And like, if you are the first generation of a person actually dealing with and unpacking these traumatic things that have happened to you as like a generational thing,
Mhm.
be kind to yourself and patient with yourself that like sometimes people are still plugged in and they might not get it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of part of it too. And yeah, and you just gotta like recognize like your piece is important just as much as anyone else's, and there's lots of healing to be done. And I think it's yeah, it's big traumatic event that a lot of people realize too as they're getting older is like their parents are also just people
Yeah. It's a
that
big traumatic
once
event.
yeah, we're just like, wow, okay, they're just like a person who's very flawed.
Just a regular people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
made of
Well,
chaos and sadness, and like we
and
just
they have
kind
their own stuff. They got
yeah,
their own stuff they're working through, and we got to give them a little
yeah,
credit for that too.
yeah.
But also, like, take care of yourself because if they're not
Mhm.
putting in work and they're only being harmful, it's okay to leave. It's okay to not.
Yeah, it's like a little bit of everything. Like, obviously, you got to do what's best for you, but you also got to acknowledge when you do a bad thing. So, like, it's like really multi
Hmm.
tiered. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you can only forgive yourself for it and try to do better, and the world will make their decisions.
Yeah. Well, it's like what in the airplane when it's like you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help someone else. So it's just like
Yeah,
deal with your own stuff. You can't just be like helping everybody, right? Like, and it's because trauma is experienced differently for everyone. There's no one way to deal with it either. So you have to let people just figure that out themselves.
yeah,
Like I was just talking to a friend of mine who was just like, it seems like people use the word trauma really loosely these days. And so they're saying like anything is trauma, like anyone has PTSD, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, it's not that it's like all of a sudden everyone is traumatized all the time. It's just like now we're talking about it.
yeah.
So like now we're allowed to attribute
There's like
those things to people.
recognition. Yeah,
Where before you weren't allowed to talk to that. But then I also had this whole conversation where I did explain like it's interpreted differently for people. There are times where, like, I have a friend who gets very anxious and, like, the world is ending a lot for things that I consider to be minimal because I've gone through other things where I'm just like you have that experience and you kind of build up this uh kind of protection for yourself because I've already been through those things. So that seems little to me, but that's big for
for
them
them. Yeah,
because that's like the biggest thing to them that they've experienced. And it doesn't
yeah.
make it any like it doesn't minimize their experience. Um, because I have a different interpretation of it. So I think it's just like really important for people to understand that. And I think the cyclical thing is super important too. Because sometimes you just think like, well, I got through it so you should just also do it. Like we can't
Yeah,
put that same expectation on other people and expect them to get through things in the same way and to
yeah,
cope with their traumas in the same way or their past in that way and just like accept people are all different. And that's something I struggle
yeah.
with all the time. Like I'm totally the kind of person that's just like, get over it. I got over it. And then I'm
You
like,
should
I
too.
didn't. I
Yeah.
didn't get over it. Spoilers.
Well, it's like a
Um,
big thing, honestly. Like that's like a generational thing, but also I think just like a human thing where it's like where you sacrificed a certain amount of things for your own sanity or to just exist and not be murdered.
mhm.
That you're like when you see someone not have to do that, you're happy for them, but also you're like, what about my inner child that has been
Yeah.
dying
You're like
this
bitter.
entire time? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's definitely like, I understand why some people feel that way, but also I recognize the inverse where it's like, but also that's their whole world. They don't
Yeah.
know.
And this
And
is a
also,
big
yeah,
deal for them. Yeah.
yeah,
And I guess it's just being patient and understanding with others. And I agree that this film is really about familial trauma. And it was like, passed down. Like you see Ming have a similar experience of wanting to be the golden child and to be what her mother wanted. She says that she used to be really close with her and something broke there because she couldn't be that anymore.
yeah,
And it's like internalized like trauma and then like her mom's internalized trauma and then it's like external trauma as well. Like it's all this like confounding. It's just like a mess. So that by the
yeah,
time it gets to Maitland, she's just like, why? And it
yeah.
really does take I agree that it's our generation that are like, it's time to go to therapy and it's okay. Um,
Yeah, and there's something so beautiful about that too, that like it's happening even if it's late. You know what I mean? For the older generation, that's like they are some reaching healing just from the push of the younger generation being like, "Hey, it's okay to have feelings and like if you've been gay this whole time, come out, you know? Like not
mhm,
every like not everyone
yeah,
has to just be a shell person. We can be real people who
yeah,
don't think society should do this to people anymore. You know what I mean? Like
mhm,
if you've just been miserable your whole life, like you don't have to do that. It's like the whole Plato's cave thing.
mhm. It
You
doesn't
you
like
you
just
can
because it's
leave the
always been that
cave.
way. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have to always be that way.
Mhm.
Um, it's the whole
Yeah.
time. And I
Yeah.
mean, also one thing I recognize where it's like lots of people will try to like heal others as an attempt to heal their inner child. So also like you got to heal yourself too. That's like a really big thing because like even if you don't mean to, you're gonna hurt people and it's
Mhm.
gonna happen. And it's
Yeah.
something that from personal experience, it's like there are lots of things I probably should have done differently in my life because I was very broken for a long time and I should not have been trying to help anybody else do it. Should have been in therapy and doing my own stuff. And now I recognize that and it's very positive and I'm doing
Yeah.
that work and
And
it's
then
good.
we wish, therapy was more affordable, things like that.
Yeah.
So we'll
Yeah.
figure it out. But I think just even
That's just
acknowledging that you need to work on things.
yeah.
So, but this was a really great film and it was a really fun series. Like I really enjoyed it. I love that we got to unpack monstrous femmes even further and in this very specific way and got to see the different um just symbolism and experiences that women go through or femmes go through um, in their journeys of self-discovery and empowerment that take all different forms and how they're affected by society, how they're fighting back against society's expectations, all those things. It's been really really fun,
Yeah.
and I'm definitely excited for the next thing to do. If you have any thoughts, comments about things that we've covered, things that like in the future if we do another monstrous femme series and you would love to see that, let us know. And you can do that by emailing us at theghouls@gmail.com or commenting on our social media or leaving us a comment and a rate in a whatever on Apple Podcasts.
Yeah.
So make sure you're subscribed. We have some really cool things coming up, and our 200th episode is coming up. It's so close.
It'll be a million
Um,
years, million episodes.
yeah, and so um, don't get married.
Delete your
Delete your
kids
kids.
or your kids will heal you. of all your sadness.
Yeah, or,
By
like,
making
your
you
kids
talk
will
about it.
yeah, your kids will show you that it's okay to
Yeah,
heal.
to just be a person, whatever
Yeah.
that means.
Like, a lot of times it's like older generations just didn't even know that was an option, and so
Yes,
it just takes someone being like, "Hey, did you know you could just do this?" And they're like,
that's why representation matters. That's
"Yes,
why that
yes,
man needs to shh,
it's
because it
not for
doesn't
you,
always have to be
bud,
made
and
for
that's
him.
okay, that's
So, like, people can
okay."
realize they're not aliens sooner.
Yeah, yes,
Um,
yeah, that you belong here,
yeah.
and your red panda is awesome. Alright, bye.
Bye.